Can Saquon Barkley be Saquon again? The answer might surprise you. Coming up next on the LockedOn Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. My name is Patricia Traina. I am your host, and I can be found at Patricia_Traina on Twitter. You can see that below. You can also find me over at GiantsCountry.com. That's all my written work. And I am here, as always, on the Locked On Giants podcast, talking about your New York Giants. So happy to have you with us on this Wednesday. And thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day, or watching on YouTube, your first watch of the day, and hope you enjoy the program. So on today's program, we're going to talk about Saquon Barkley. And can Saquon Barkley be Saquon again? By that, I mean Saquon Barkley, when he was drafted by the Giants with the second overall pick in the 2018 draft, went on to have a spectacular rookie year. Really justified, all the hype around him, the whole touched by the hand of God thing, the whole, shebang, if you will. And then injuries set in, and then changes happened with the coaching staff and the schemes. And suddenly Saquon didn't look anything more than just another guy. So with everything kind of settling down a little bit, can Saquon Barkley get back to being Saquon again, the Saquon that we saw in 2018? I believe that he can. And I'm going to, over the course of the show, talk about some of the things that need to happen for Saquon to become Saquon again, outside, of course, of staying healthy, which we all know needs to happen. Then at the end, I'm going to talk a little bit about what happens if he does become Saquon again. What is he worth? And should the Giants sign him? So that is our agenda here on the Locked On Giants podcast. Again, happy to have you with us as always. So let us jump in. All right. First thing I want to start off with is the passing game and Saquon's role in the passing game. Now, I went back and I did some research looking at some historical stats from Pro Football Reference as well as Pro Football Focus. So the numbers that I'm going to give you are primarily from those two sites. But some interesting things, to say the least. In Saquon's rookie season, he had 114 pass targets. All right. Those pass targets have dropped every single year. Now, I'm going to throw out 2020 because that was the year that he had the ACL. We're not going to count that because he only was active for 5 quarters of football. So I'm not going to count that. But I found it interesting that Saquon went from getting 114 pass targets in 2018 to 69 in 2019 to 57 in 2021. Now, I know, again, there were injuries. In 2019, he had a high ankle sprain, missed some time. In 2021, he had an ankle sprain, missed some time. But still, you're talking a significant drop-off in his pass targets. And, now in 2021, I get it. He was coming off of the ACL. And the sprained ankle didn't exactly help him. All right. But I just, the other drop-off, I just don't get it. I mean, I would have thought that he would have been targeted a little bit more than he was in 2019 and 2021. And for whatever the reason, the coaches went away from that. And I don't understand why, because, Barkley, even when he's not 100%, he still can outrun most other guys. And was the ankle injury last year a problem for him? It might have been. I mean, there were some times where you watched him and you said to yourself, he doesn't quite look like he's trusting his leg, both his knee and the ankle. But as the season went on, you saw a glimpse of him getting back to what he should be or what he could be. And still, it just didn't come. And you wonder, why that was. So obviously, the first thing is if Saquon's going to get back to being Saquon in 2018, the guy that had over 2,000 all-purpose yards, the first thing I think that has to happen, and we'll get to the running game in a moment, is they've got to get him involved more in the passing game. Now, I went back and looked at some of his passing game assignments. All right, he had 4 touchdown receptions in 2018, and then in 2019 and 2021 combined, he had 2 each, so that would be 4. So even the touchdown production went down. All right, so I just thought that, the fact that he was targeted on 6.8% of the pass targets, all right, he received 6.8% of the pass targets in that first year, and that number began to drop in 2019 and then again in 2021 to as low as 1.6. I mean, when you have that big of a drop, all right, again, I get it. There was concern about the injury, but he was healthy. If he wasn't healthy, would he have been out there or should he have been out there? I'm saying if he was healthy, and they obviously last year they brought him along slowly because they didn't want him to have a setback. I thought he would have had a bigger role in the passing game, and it just never came. Now, here's another thing I found in my research of Saquon Barkley's deployment. He had most of his success when he was split out wide. He wasn't really put in the slot that much. Obviously he had enough touches coming out of the backfield as a receiver, but most of his success came when he was split out wide. And when they went back to in 2021 to having him split out wide, they also went with shorter routes. And I never quite understood why that was. I mean, you put Saquon Barkley against a linebacker or even a defensive back, and chances are he's going to win that matchup. And the Giants just never really took advantage of it. Again, injury aside, they never took advantage of it. So I just thought that was kind of weird, And also, you look at the depth of his passing targets, only 3 of them were for 20 or more yards, and 1 was in the intermediate range. So everything was all short stuff. But yet both of his receiving touchdowns came in the intermediate to deep range, where again, Barkley is a matchup. So what can we take away from this? Get him involved in the passing game. All right. Now, here's the good news. I think this coaching staff has Saquon Barkley lining up all over the formation. We have seen him line up wide. We have seen him line up in the slot on either side. We have seen him come out of the backfield. We have seen him go in motion prior to the snap. So he, in practice, has been getting more opportunities. That said, I can remember coming on this program and telling you about how in practice other coaching staffs were doing the same thing, that they were splitting him out wide, they were putting him in motion, and it never showed up in the games. And I'm not lying when I say that. It really did happen. So my point here is, will this coaching staff look at the work that's being done in the off season, the success rate that they're having with Saquon Barkley, lining him up in the slot, putting him out wide, and just, lining him up basically all over the formation and getting him into space? Will they look at that as a success, or will they scrap it? That's going to be really telling. I think if the Giants want to get Saquon Barkley back to being Saquon Barkley, they've got to build on whatever success they have, tweak whatever maybe isn't working, and just stick with a commitment to get this kid into space more often, because he can be very dangerous with the ball in his hands. Now, what about the rushing game? Well, stick around. I'm going to talk about that next. All right, Giant fans, more still to come on today's LockedOn Giants podcast. But first, if you're looking to bite into a delicious, low-calorie, low-sugar granola bar that's good for you, well, now you can with Built's new granola bars, available in 3 amazing flavors: chocolate peanut butter, chocolate coconut, and white chocolate berry. They're the perfect combination of crunch and chewiness. But just like Built bars and puffs, these babies are packed with protein and are covered in 100% real chocolate. And with just 150 calories, 15 grams of collagen protein, and only 4 grams of sugar, Built granola bars are the sweet indulgence you didn't know that you need to have. So head on over to built.com where you can get your favorite flavor, or if you want, try all three by putting together a mixed box. And don't forget, use our special promo code LOCK15 to save 15% off your first order at built.com. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the LockedOn Giants podcast. I am Patricia Traina, your host, and happy again to have you with us here on the LockedOn Giants podcast on this Wednesday. And coming up on tomorrow's episode of LockedOn Giants, I have a first-time guest. I'm really excited to welcome in this individual to the LockedOn Giants podcast. It is Lori Fitzpatrick. Lori used to be a quarterback for women's football. And this podcast coming up, I'm really excited about because Lori knows the quarterback position really, really well. So our topic is going to be all about Danielle Jones. We're going to talk about what she has observed on film with Danielle Jones, watching Danielle Jones. I'm going to interject what I've seen in practice of him. And the show's going to be all about Danielle Jones. So that is on tap for tomorrow. Lori is very knowledgeable. I think you're going to really enjoy her contributions to the show. And I hope you'll tune in. Always looking to bring on different guests with different expertise and whatnot, and just absolutely excited to have Lori on, someone whose work I've always admired. She writes over for Touchdown Wire, does a lot of film breakdown, and I believe she's also a podcast host for the Believe Network. So check it out. That'll be on tomorrow's LockedOn Giants podcast. All right, we are talking about Saquon Barkley, and can Saquon be Saquon again? All right. The Saquon that we know from 2018, who was so dynamic, so, explosive, who just looked like the guy the Giants kept promising that he would be. And as I said before, injuries have gotten in the way. I'm not saying that hasn't been part of the problem, but also the deployment of Saquon Barkley has gotten in the way as well. Different coaches coming in with different philosophies and different ways that they want to use him. And you question, based on the results, if the coaching staff has deployed Saquon to his strengths. So let's talk now about the rushing aspect of it. And again, this data that I'm presenting to you comes from Pro Football Focus and Pro Football Reference. Pro Football Reference is really good. If you're looking for a free site with advanced analytics, that's a really good site. I recommend you check it out. All right, let's talk about Barkley's rushing. Now, in 2021, one of the things that really jumped out at me about how Barkley was deployed by the coaches is that he had his zone and gap runs almost identical. In other words, the number of zone runs he was asked to execute versus the number of gap runs he was asked to execute were almost even. Now, why is that significant? Well, because if you go back and you look at his 2,000-yard rushing seasons in 2018 and 2019, he ran more zone than gap. All right. So is there something to having him run zone more often than gap? The number would suggest it. So you wonder, why did the coaches get away from having him run more zone as opposed to gap? I don't know the answer to that. Was it the offensive line? Was it the fact that, they couldn't get a push? I don't know what the answer is, but I do know that the results just weren't the same, injury notwithstanding. Okay, so now let's take a look at the outcome. In 2018, Barkley was asked to execute a season high of 20 designed runs of 15 or more yards. All right. He had 706 yards on those design runs. Remember, Barkley ran for over 1,000 yards in 2018. 706 came on those design runs. Okay. They limited his runs up the gut. In 2018, they limited the number of runs they asked him to execute up the gut. All right. So most of Barkley's yardage, if you look at his average yards per carry, going to the left end, the right end, behind the left tackle, the left guard, so on and so forth, he was actually better and had a high average per carry, as opposed to when he was sent straight up the middle into the teeth of the run defense. So the odd thing about that is that the Giants, we would later see coaching staffs ask him to run up the gut where there was just not enough push. Now, some of that's on the offensive line. Some of that could also be on Barkley for not, digging in and pushing the pile. Some of that could be a result of, the injury. Like I said, maybe not fully trusting the knee to plant it and push forward. Could be any number of those things. But the point is they went away from what worked with him in the running game. Head scratcher, right? So if you're Brian Dable and Mike Kafka and the rest of the offensive coaching staff, and you're watching the film on Barkley, and you're trying to figure out, okay, what did this guy do well before we got here? Don't you think that's something you want to address and work more into? Now, in the practices that we have seen, the OTAs, granted, it's only been 2 OTAs as I record this. The third one's coming up on Thursday. Barkley, from what I could see, has run more of his rushing attempts to the outside. He's done more zone running than he has gap. All right. Getting back to basics, getting back to what worked for him. Again, is that going to carry over into the regular season? Well, we'll have to wait and see. But they're getting back to what works with him. And that's encouraging to see from the coaching staff. All too often, I've spoken on this podcast about coaches trying to fit square pegs into round holes. You can't do that. If you're really committed to getting the best out of a player, doesn't it make sense to ask him to do what he does best? Now, some people might say, well, then how does he grow? How do you know that he can't run, this type of run or do this type of play? You don't, which is why you practice in the spring. You see if it works. But if it's not working in practice, why would you carry it over into the game? And that's where I think some of the coaching staffs in the past went wrong. It was a matter of, trying to force the player into a perceived role within the scheme rather than adjusting the scheme to fit what the player did well. And I think, and this is why I am kind of encouraged that Saquon Barkley can be Saquon again, that this coaching staff is not going to do that. They're going to play to his strengths. And I think this offense, just based on what I've seen so far, can develop into a pretty good one for Saquon Barkley. So that leads to the next question. What happens if Saquon Barkley balls out? Should the Giants sign him? What's a good contract for him? What's that going to look like? I'm going to tell you coming up next. All right, Giant fans, we have more coming up on today's LockedOn Giants podcast. But first, BetOnline.net is the only place that offers the best information on the latest odds, contests, and player props for all your sports betting needs. No matter what sport you're into, BetOnline.net has you covered. Plus, they offer everything you need to know for live betting and your favorite Vegas casino games. So head on over to betonline.net today to learn more about the trends and all the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Welcome back, Giant fans, to the LockedOn Giants podcast. I'm Patricia Trainer, your host, and we are discussing Saquon Barkley. Can Saquon Barkley be the player he was in 2018? Or are his best years behind him because of all the injuries, the usage of his skill set, or what have you? I think he can be the player he was in 2018. And I've outlined some of the things that need to change in the first two segments. And in this segment, let's assume that Barkley, everything clicks for him, that he has a big year, he balls out, that he, has 2,000 yards again, all-purpose yards. What did the Giants do with him? Do they re-sign him? Do they let him walk and take, say, okay, we're going to take, a potential comp pick? What do they do? Well, it depends. I think if Barkley racks up 2,000 or more all-purpose yards, you re-sign him. And the reason I say that is I don't necessarily think Barkley is going to be the focal point of the offense. All right. It's not going to be that, okay, everything's going to flow through him. Is he going to be a big part of the offense? Absolutely. But the idea with Barkley is if he can make the most out of the opportunities he does get, which are going to be, designed based on the opponent, the game plan, it's going to change every week. If he can make the most of those opportunities, then gosh, by all means, resign him. But here's the thing. You cannot resign him and make him the highest paid running back in the league. That's where you have to draw the line. So I went to Spot Track and I looked up, Barkley's market value. I looked up where he currently ranks. Barkley, of course, is playing on the option year of his rookie deal, which currently is the 10th highest salary for running backs, right? Not too bad, all right, considering there's 32 running backs in the league, when I mean 32 running backs, 32 starting running backs in the league. So not hard, not too bad. So Spot Track has a market value for Barkley at 4 years, 22.613 million, which averages out to about 5.6 million per year. That would drop Barkley down to roughly the 15th highest paid running back if that deal were to go through. Could the Giants live with that? I think they could. That's not a lot of money for a running back. That's not a bad amount of money. If Barkley balls out, I think that would be perfectly fair for him. Now, if Barkley balls out and he wants more or gets more on the open market, then see ya. The Giants can't afford, in my opinion, even though they're going to have a better cap situation next year, they can't afford to pay Barkley, and make him the highest paid running back in the NFL. Can't happen. Not with that injury history. Not with what we have seen with Todd Gurley of the Rams, Christian McCaffrey of the Panthers. You just can't sink that kind of money into a running back. Not when you have to potentially sink big bucks into your quarterback, or if, as the case might be after, next season, 2023, left tackle, when Andrew Thomas's deal is something you're going to have to look at. So I think there would need to be a middle ground if the Giants were to bring Barkley back, assuming he balls out. But it's got to be in proportion because, again, it's not as though Barkley is going to be the featured part of the offense. He might be featured, on a week here and there, depending on the game plan, but not every week. This isn't like, a few years ago when Odell Beckham Jr. was constantly the featured guy because that's all the Giants had. The Giants can't do that, and I don't think they will. So the pay has to reflect that. And I think if both sides agree to that and both sides are willing to work together on that, I could see a situation where Barkley can be a Giant for several more years still to come. And if not, he walks away. Depending on the deal he gets, the Giants get a comp pick, onward and upward, as they say. So it'll be interesting to see whether or not what we're seeing in OTAs carries over to training camp and then the regular season. It'll be interesting to see if Barkley can stay healthy. And it'll be interesting to see what the Giants ultimately do with him once his contract is up. All stuff still to be determined. And of course, we'll be following it all here on the LockedOn Giants podcast. So hope you will tune in. All right, folks, that's going to do it for me on today's show. Thank you again for making us your first listen of the day, or if watching on YouTube, your first watch of the day. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you like and subscribe to our channel. If you're listening on any of our audio platforms, please consider subscribing to our podcast. It is free on all the platforms, and we do appreciate you listening, tuning in, sending in your feedback. And I look forward to catching up with y'all tomorrow with special guest Lori Fitzpatrick.